All right, welcome to CS13 to pre-processing day one. It's really, I think this is really awesome because pre-processing has multiple value propositions to you as a learner. And let me talk to you about those. I saw a couple of you chatting earlier this morning saying, basically, what is the value of pre-processing? And I love that. I love that you question it because it's only going to make you a better developer. We need to be critically thinking. So I love that you're going, why is this even valuable? And so let's talk about a couple reasons. Number one, it's actually preparing you for JavaScript. So we're going to be using a lot of the concepts that JavaScript employs, like scope, nesting, variables, functions. They all exist inside of preprocessing. So it's basically a soft introduction to JavaScript. So that's part one that a lot of you would not even understand. Like, oh, whoa, this is actually an intro to JavaScript. So number two, less does not actually mean you're writing less code per se. Now, eventually it does, but initially there's extra syntactical pieces you have to learn and memorize. The value of less lies within the dry principle. Don't repeat yourself. So when you hear it, make sure your code is dry. That means people don't want you to reuse logic that you've already used once before. So that is proposition number two of pre-processing is less is way, way more dry because we can use code from, we'll talk about that today, called mix-ins that allow us to not repeat ourselves. And then lastly, I think it makes you a better CSS developer. For those of you that are kind of teetering on your CSS skills, I actually think pre-processing does a better job of explaining CSS because it's a little bit more intuitive. And you'll see shortly what I mean by that. So I just wanted to put those three big ideas out to you first. Number one, it's a JavaScript intro. Number two, it's going to make your code reusable. And number three, it's going to help you learn CSS better. So as far as pre-processing in the workplace goes, it's used everywhere. It just depends on where you go, what you're going to use. So if it's less CSS or Sass, Stylus, the list goes on and on. And the good news is if you learn one, you've basically learned them all. It's the principle of learning pre-processing that impacts the using of it. Now, is pre-processing going to go away in the future? I hope so. I hope that we don't have to pre-process. I hope that the browser can just do all this stuff for us. But for now, we're limited by our preprocessors. Okay. Now, some of you have said, hey, should I have had the preprocessor ready for this lecture? No, you don't have to have it ready for this lecture. I've built the project this afternoon with the idea that you might spend an hour setting up your preprocessor if you need it. You'll find if you've already set it up that in some cases, if everything goes perfect, it's 10 minutes to set it up. But sometimes it can take an hour if things don't go the way you want them to. So in those cases, please reach out to your project managers or the help channel. Remember, I've created step-by-step videos inside of the learning module. So right here, I've got our Mac install and our PC install. Remember, if you're going with Linux, it's similar to Mac, except that I don't think you have Homebrew on Linux. So, but there are instructions for you Linux users when you go install the package manager. You have to pick your distribution and it gives you a file. Okay, so don't stress about if you're one of those people right now that's like, I don't have it ready. I'm like, don't worry. The beautiful thing is we can use CodePen for everything today. All right, here we go. Let's talk about what the heck pre-processing even is. So it really is just a more robust syntax for CSS written in a different language. That language is then compiled into normal CSS. So we're actually using a different language. In this case, we're going to be using some syntax that looks just like CSS with some nuances. And so here's what it looks like. We write in our own special syntax, and that syntax in this case is called less. And less stands for leaner style sheets. Okay. Why are we not using Sass? Well, mostly because of the build. So Sass would require all of you to install Ruby. And because we're in a JavaScript stack for most of this UI section in the front end section, we're just going to have you use Node, which is built right under the hood with our compiler. That's why we're using Yarn, or you could use npm to install it. But for those of you that know the difference, Yarn allows us to install it in an area in your computer where you don't have to use the sudo command every 5 seconds. npm, if you do the Node installer, installs it in the spot in your computer where the admin rights require sudo every time. And so Yarn is way more convenient in that one way. Also, we use Yarn across the board for React. Yarn was made by Facebook. Facebook also created React. So we're staying inside those bounds to be consistent. That's the only reason why. NPM is awesome, and Yarn uses NPM under the hood as well. So don't freak out about all these little nuances, please. They're not important. Just do what we ask, and it'll make a lot of sense. If you're already comfortable with NPM, just use NPM. That's fine. But those of you that are not comfortable and you're new to this whole idea, just follow the instructions given to you. Okay, so step 1, we've got our less that we're going to write. Step 2 of pre-processing, it goes into a compiler. And this compiler is kind of, we don't see the compiler. It's what we're installing when we install it with Yarn, right? So this is getting installed on our computer. And then it outputs CSS. So let's go see what this actually looks like. I've given everybody this link inside of channel. You can follow along if you want, but for now, I'd actually prefer if you just watch what I'm doing, because I want to set up this project, then I'll hit the save button. So right now, if we were to write some HTML, so div container, and then within my container, let's say I have a section tag, and let's say this has a class on it. So we'll say like, main content, and then I have like an H1, and I'll say, we'll do a website like that digital agency like we've been doing. So digital agency, and then we'll do a P tag, say we make digital goods. So this is our very basic website that'll get us at least principally where we want to go. And I think it's better than just a bunch of dumb boxes. So in this case, we have container and we have a section, right? Nothing new here. One thing I do suggest, and I've been trying to push us towards, is adding an extra class on our container so that we can be more specific to the page we're on. So this is just a little pro tip I want you to start thinking about, is utilizing classes to be more specific. So what I mean by that is we can now set up our container. This is just normal CSS right here. So we'll say width 600px. Actually, we learned, let's be awesome. We learned about max width yesterday, and so we'll be fully responsive from now on. So 100%. We'll do a border of 1px solid red. We can kind of see where our thing ends, right? Of course, we can type in margin 0 auto, so 0 top and bottom, and then left and right margins are auto. So it centers on the page, sweet, looking good. And of course, if we get below the number, we don't get the horizontal scroll bar because we're using 100%. So basically, that's yesterday, right? And then, of course, media queries and all the extra good stuff, like rems and all that. So in this case, we have our container. The container could be used on 5 different pages, right? I could use this same class on 5 different pages, and it would be valuable because it does a base thing for me. But the second that I start styling stuff that's unique to the page, I want to be more specific. So I can do this. I could say home, right? And then I could say, all right, within my home, I want something specifically to change. And maybe on the home page only, my background is going to be unique. So we'll say like light gray or something. I think it's just no dash. There we go. So there's a light gray on the home page, right? Hypothetically, I could set up another container. Now this is all hypothetical because you wouldn't have 2 pages on one at this juncture. And so we'll say like services or even contact, whatever. Let's be more realistic. And then we could say main content still applies because it's different in main contact, but in here we could just say contact us, right? And then give us a call. So pretend these are two different pages. I'm just doing mini versions of them. Now I can come in here, and I've got containers still working, still giving me all the good stuff I want, but now I'm being more specific by saying contact. And I could say, okay, your background is going to be, well, it's already white, as you can see. It's not getting impacted by the styles that we wrote. We could just do gray and see the difference. So this, my friends, is how you can get specificity across multiple pages without bumping into your styles. Now, currently, these all look like global styles. Remember, a global style is simply a style that impacts the whole web page. So if you are only one selector deep, you're basically a global style. So again, another global style would be like the star selector with like box sizing, border box, right? That's a global style. Anything that's like element level. So like H1s, all H1s should be something, right? That's a global style. Okay. I feel like I need to talk about this because I'm seeing patterns in your pull requests that make me go, okay, hopefully they're not misunderstanding that a single selector like this, these are global. Now to make it less global, we can go in here and say home, not less, sorry, not like the syntax, but the specificity needs to get heavier. So in this case, if I come back up to my home and my digital main marketing or main content, I could say main content. And then I could say, all right, you H1, I want your color to be orange. And you can see that this went orange and this did not go orange, right? Because I was very specific. And so now you can see how I'm starting to build the specificity. It's a little heavier every time. Home, main content, and now let's say I want to do the P tag, which is a sibling, so it's right there, and I could make the font size bigger, right? And let's do our rems. So I'll come up here, I'll make another global style, and I'll say font size. Do you guys remember what it is? If I want to set it to 10 pixels based on the regular default browser setting, 62.5, good job. So now I've got my font size at 62.5%. Notice everything gets readjusted to be super teeny. And that's because that's equivalent to 10 pixels on my regular font. So now what I could do is I could set the default font size if I wanted to 1.6 rem to kind of equal out to where we were. Then of course I can go down here. I can go to the home page of the H1. I could say, okay, but H1 on this one's going to be like 3 rem, right, which is basically 30 pixels. Orange is really hard to see, so let's do blue. And then on this one, we could do 2.4 rem. See how all this works? All this stuff is just review, but it's leading up to where we want to go. So at this point, we've now got this, we've got this specificity to match, right? So we've got home main content, H1, home main content, P. So these are no longer global styles. Now home would still be considered global, so I have to be careful and not name anything a home. But because I'm following my own convention, I probably won't, right? Like I shouldn't have another page called home. So in this case, these styles right here are one page. Homepage styles, right? And then these styles down here would represent the contact page. And so I could literally copy and paste the same structure only because I know the HTML is the same, right? I built it and copied and pasted it. Change these things out to the contact page. And then I can make these my own colors, like purple, font size 40. And then down here, I could change the font size to something like 5 rems or something, right? So you can now see how I can completely control my destiny and my specificity by using this kind of pattern, all right? And all we're doing is we're just matching the nested elements that are up here. So section H1P, section H1P, and all that's unique here is that extra little word, right? Home and contact. That's how powerful those classes are. Are there any questions about what I've just showed you? Is there anything confusing? There are no dumb questions. Please ask them. I know, I mean, this is a culmination of everything that we've been talking about minus media queries so far. We haven't brought them in yet, but it's the same thing. Okay, I'm assuming we're pretty solid here then, if I don't see any questions. So that being understood, let me remove the contact page just for now so we don't have extra visual distractions while we're learning. Just wanted to review that concept with you of specificity. So these are global styles. These are specific homepage styles. Okay. That being understood, we now have more tools at our disposal to help us even better with this problem of specificity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the settings up here and go to CSS tab, and there's a CSS preprocessor dropdown. And I'm going to hit less. Notice there's a bunch, right? But we're going to focus on less. And then I'm going to not worry about a reset right now. Well, let's just put it in so we know we're always 0. And then I'm going to hit save and close. Now this changed because of the 0, not because of the less. So let me get it to where it looked like it did before, which was basically some margin, right? So I can come in here and say margin 15px, and I'm not worried about percent base layout because the margin's never going to hit that. And then on this side, we could make it match. So 15px. Okay. So we're kind of back to where we were pre-reset. Excuse me. So I've just introduced less and nothing changed, right? Did you notice that? I turned less on. I've got a preprocessor actually running under the hood now on this page, and nothing changed. That is because less ultimately is just CSS. It's just CSS. But we have extra things that we can write and syntax that we can write. Remember, syntax is just certain structures of code that provide meaning. So now what we can do, this is really cool, you guys. Watch this. I'm going to convert this, and we're going to use a thing called nesting. So nesting was a concept before, right, where you have an item inside of another item. So that H1 is considered to be nested inside of the section tag. And this section tag is considered to be nested inside of this home or container class. Okay, we've beaten that horse. Let's try something new here. So I'm going to say home, just like this. But here's what's so cool about preprocessors. They actually mimic the HTML nesting structure exactly. So what I mean by that is you actually nest your selectors inside of your selectors. So I'm going to say background light gray. Then I'm going to grab this selector, main content. Main content, and watch what I'm doing. I'm actually writing this selector literally inside that selector. Okay, I'm actually nesting my CSS just like my HTML. So then I come over to my main content. Notice the main content doesn't have any specific styles on it, but it does have children inside of it. So I'm going to say H1, and I'm nesting my H1. Now notice how these little brackets are starting to get a little crazy, right? Already there's 3 of them. Well, one cool thing is we can use single line comments now. So single line comments in JavaScript are just // Well, we can use / because that's what we're compiling with. So I can come in here and say main content as a reminder to myself that this is where main content ends. And of course, I could do the same thing with home if I wanted to. And I usually only do that on the outermost layers just so I don't lose my sanity when I see a bunch of curly braces at the bottom. All right, but look how cool that already this structure is so much prettier because it mimics the HTML structure exactly. Like, look at this structure, right? So if we were to, get rid of the white spacing and make sure you can see that curve, how it comes in. You see that bow right there? Well, guess what? You're starting to see it right here as well. So it's visually almost identical to our HTML, which really helps you understand the specificity, thus making you a better CSS developer. So if we come in here, we have our H1. Let's just borrow all our colors and all of our font sizes. So we'll pop it inside of here. So there's my H1 styles. And then we have a P tag, which is a sibling. So what do siblings do? They're on the same level, right? Makes sense. So we're going to grab this P tag, pop it in, and there we go. Now, doesn't that just look so much prettier? And you, as a developer, can't mess up your own code. So you can't accidentally screw up specificity because it's literally nested. So this actually prevents you from being a bad developer. So in this case, bad developer meaning you make a bunch of global styles. So I'm going to delete all these things and let's see if it looks the same. It looks identical, right? And just to prove that I'm not fleecing you, let's turn off our preprocessor. And look, everything breaks. So this is preprocess only. So I come in here, turn on my less, save it again, and we've got our code back. This, my friends, is how I thought CSS should be when I first started learning it. I even tried to nest selectors, I remember the first time, and I was like, why doesn't it work? And I was like, oh, I have to write out those stupid giant selectors. Well, now we can do the more intuitive nesting here. Now, the cool thing is at the end of the day, meaning at the end of this little diagram, so we just wrote our syntax, right? We just nested our elements. Now, there's a compiler running on the server, so it's running on CodePen server. That's why we don't have to worry about having a compiler running right now for you on your machine, because this is on CodePen, but it outputs the CSS. So where's the output? Well, guess what? CodePen has a little drop down that lets you see the output, so you can actually see what happens at the end of the day. So here we go. View compiled CSS, click. Whoa, this looks just like the CSS I just wrote. Because it is. It's the same thing. It's just now we can use pre-processing to make more sense to us as developers. And then it outputs the machine content that the browser needs to understand. So when we talk about preprocessors, it's purely for humans. It's for humans to write more sensical, logical code to us. And then the processor handles everything and outputs it so the computer can consume it. Isn't this awesome? Because I think before, a lot of you were not writing your selectors like this. You were probably writing like maybe home, maybe main content, but you weren't putting them together, and you were lacking that understanding of the nested cascade. Well, the beautiful thing is, with less preprocessing, you're forced by nature of nesting to have better specificity. Okay? So this is just one little concept, but it's a huge concept because it allows you, the developer, to have way more control of your specificity. All right, let me see if there's any questions. Tom says, does Control-Shift-F format in CodePen? I don't know. You'll have to try that yourself, Tom. I just use Shift-Tab to get that stuff to format. Let's see. Good, you guys are seeing it. Perfection, beautiful. This makes me very happy. Good, because that's how I feel when I do this stuff too. I can't really code a normal CSS anymore, just so you know. Like I can't. Like whenever I teach you guys CSS, it hurts my soul because I want to pre-process. And remember how I was doing those media queries and I was like writing weird code? Well, you'll see why today. Because pre-processing is amazing. Okay, any questions about nesting or pre-processing in general at this juncture? Is there anything that's not clear about what I just talked to you about? So nesting is one of the principles today, one of the objectives to learn. Okay. Yeah. An Owen Wilson wow. Wow. Why wasn't it this way to begin with? Yes, I know. But I honestly think browsers are going to get there. We actually have now, just this year, we have variables now inside of our natural browsers. So we can actually use variables. But because we're using the full ecosystem of preprocessors, we're just going to stay inside this ecosystem. Okay, so let's talk about variables. Now that you guys are understanding that we can use these preprocessors, One thing I would be remiss, though, and would not be wise of me to leave you without telling you, is when you are using nesting, you have to be careful about going too deep. Inevitably, when you learn about nesting, you just want to nest everything. You're just like, I want to use nesting for the rest of my life now. It's so easy. And I would caution you to say, don't get too crazy with nesting because it is so specific. Meaning, if you go past basically 4 of these curly braces, you are now 4 levels deep. And so it's so specific, it's basically an ID at that point. Like nothing can change that code, right? Because it's got this death grip of 4 levels of specificity. So I would recommend to you to try to avoid going further than 4 deep in your nesting structures. So what if you had a structure, an HTML structure, that had something like this? So what if you had a div, and then you had another div, and then you had another div, right? That does happen quite a bit. Just structurally, there's big pieces of HTML. I would recommend that you start wherever it needs to be that will end at 4 deep. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a class here, and it's like, rolling deep. And then down here, I would then come up on this level up here and say rolling deep, right? And I'd probably keep it inside at least my home tag. So whatever it needs to be on the home page, that's how it would look, okay? So notice I'm disregarding all this structure up here, okay? So in this case, just try. If you find yourself going further than 4 curly braces, it's time to drop one of your selectors, okay? Because you don't want your selectors to go more than 4 deep. Otherwise, the specificity is so heavy, it's unruly. So be careful about going more than 4. Okay. So let's go into variables. Variables are exactly what you think they are. There are some gotchas, though. By the way, everything I'm pulling out of my brain is from here, documentation. I want you to learn and love. And this is, I could even say this is principle 4 of today, is learning how to read documentation, because documentation is going to be a huge part of your career for the rest of your career, whether you like it or not. These are the digital books that we have to write our code and to understand the syntax. So in this case, Les gives us rules on how to write their own code. So if we scroll down, there's an overview of all the things I'm talking about, okay? So we're going to be talking about variables. These are pretty self-explanatory, and then they just give you examples. So sometimes the documentation's not that great. Like I would say, that's not very good, right? But they are pretty self-explanatory when you look at it for a little bit. So sometimes documentation, it's just written by other humans. So, we're not all robots. We all have our ways and our voice in our writing. But in this case, I really like this documentation for some of the explanations they give. But the examples are not that great. And so what I've done is I've come in here in pre-processing 1, and I've given you way better examples, I think. So basically, I'm saying, here's how you would use this example. I just called it out a little bit more than they do. So I've given you examples of each piece that we're going to talk about today. So you have both things to look at, the training kit and the actual LESS documentation. I've basically converted some of their confusing stuff into stuff that I think is more sensical. All right, so this is where I'm getting my knowledge from, and this is where you should get your knowledge from when you have questions as well. Because the documentation, you consume it so much that eventually it becomes part of your knowledge, right? So like I've been pre-processing for so many years now that I don't have to look at this, but I had to look at this every time I started. So for you, I would have this up right there on the right side of my screen, or minimized, ready to go at all times. Like you should really heavily be depending on their documentation while you're learning. Then eventually you can start letting go and writing your own code. So when you see me flying through this, writing my own code, do not be intimidated. I'm just more familiar and have had more time. When I first started, I had this thing up right next to me. Okay, so with variables, they're very interesting because first off, syntactically, we're going to do something you've never done before. So at this point, I want you to follow along with me. So I'm going to save this. Here's the link. Let's get some fingers on keyboards. Click that link with me. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I want you to go to the very tip top of the page. And I'm going to introduce to you again. I want you to get some practice, so go write a comment. // remember, that's our single line comment. By the way, multiple line comments still exist. It's still /**/. But in this case, single lines are so much more convenient. And I can just say variables, right? I put variables at the top of the page as a courtesy to the next developer. However, technically speaking, variables inside of less preprocessors are lazy loaded. Lazy loaded is a term they use to say, we load them last. So that means that you could put a variable literally anywhere in the page and it would work. So think of variables as constant global styles. So you have to be careful with your variables. So don't put them at the bottom of the page and your developer doesn't know about them. Put all your variables at the top of the page so the developer can see them. Here's the syntax. So let's do it together. @ symbol. So that's how you start writing a variable. And then we'll just say main color. Main dash color with a colon and then a semicolon. And then we can put a color in there. So you can do whatever color you want. I'll do my main color. We'll just say, let's see, red is easy to see. So we'll just do red for a second. So at this point, I now have a variable that has a value of red. By the way, I could put the hex code of red in there. So I could do F00, and that would be red. Okay. So in this case, I can put in many things. I can put in numbers. All right. So in this case, I'm going to type in red, which is a valid CSS value. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference my main color. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. So do that with me. And let's go ahead and just go down to this H1 and see how it says blue here. I want you to paste in your variable. So it should say main dash color. Notice how it just went red. So all it's doing is it's got a placeholder for that color. And it is really straightforward. But the thing that's not straightforward is that these are lazy loaded. So if I take this variable and I go to the bottom of the page, it still works. If I take this variable and I put it inside of a container, it still works. So you have to be careful about these variables because they're all over the place. So put them at the top of the page so the developers don't run into these landmines of variables they don't know about. All right, as far as like the ins and outs of variables, there's a ton of information if you click this thing, like learn more about variables. That's going to be deeper dive, so if you want to, you can. The general idea that I need you to understand is that variables hold values and they can be used inside of our code. The concept here of this process of a variable replacing a value is called interpolation. Interpolation is just swapping values with a symbol. So in this case, we've got @main color. It's being swapped out for red. So remember, we have this drop down called compiled or view compiled. So I'm going to do that really quick. I want you to notice, watch what happens up here. It's gone, right? Variables are consumed by the compiler. So the compiler uses the variable, puts it in the right spot, and then doesn't show it in the compiled CSS. But notice right here, the color red is showing, right? So it consumed the variable, used interpolation to swap the values. Any questions on variables that I can answer? Jordan says, do variables in less have scope? No, they're lazy loaded. Lauren says, should the variable be before or after the reset? It doesn't matter, except wherever, well, I would say, like in your project today, I'd give you a reset, and I would say put the variables under the reset just for convenience of scrolling, right? because otherwise you'd have to put the freaking variables at the top of the page, and that would be a nightmare for you. But wherever you put your variables, put them in the same spot. Good question. Patrick says, my variable isn't changing to red. Outside of seeing your code, not sure what's going on there. Marshall says, what are some great examples of when you would use them in the workforce? Okay, let's talk about that. Oh, good job, Patrick. He said he got it. Michael says, am I expected to use variables in every color? I would recommend you do, Michael, and let me show you why. And this actually answers Marshall's question at the same time. So in the workforce, oftentimes you're given a palette of colors by a designer, or you're given a PDF or a JPEG or a PNG or some design file, and you have to extract those colors. So the problem is, we don't live in a world where everything's just red, right? Usually we get something else. So like, let's go to ESPN.com or something. It's always super busy, so that's why I always pick it. So if we use our color picker, I've got this color picker in my tool. Don't worry about it. It's just nice to grab colors off of websites and stuff. So if I were to grab this like ESPN red color right here, let's see. It's not working. I don't know why. Maybe I have to reload the page. Maybe it's all these ads or something. There we go. Yeah, it's the ads. Okay, so as you can see, this color picker is not playing nice with everything. But if I were to go over this, well, everything's a link, so it's not letting me click. But you can see that the hex code's on that thing. Usually I can click it while this thing's enabled, and it doesn't do it. So ESPN must have some code on there that's stopping me. Let me go to a site that doesn't do that, like Less. So I can grab this color right here, and you can see that Less has this blue bar, right? So if I come back here, I could pop in this color right here. So now I've got that Less, like dark blue. The problem with this, and this really goes to your question, Michael, is, man, do I have to freaking put a variable down for every color? The answer is usually you should only have about 3 colors to your page. Like, you shouldn't be having like 4,000 colors on your page. And so let me show you how we do this in the workplace. So you usually have a variable called main color, and then you have a descriptive variable that tells you what the color's name is. And so I have a color picker, or sorry, a color namer. This is the one I like. It's called Name That Color. Give you this link, and they automatically put a color in, just as an example. And what if I'm a developer for Skittles? Even then, you won't have tons of colors. So with this color, what I can do is I can take the hex code, this color right here, 1D365D. I can pop it in here, and it'll give me a name approximately meaning within the hex code region of that color. And so this color is called cello. Well, the interesting thing is, according to this naming website. So if you worked on a team with me and we were building front-end stuff together, I would say everybody has to use this site. Like, I require it. So we all have the same color names. Because otherwise, you literally get 75 shades of gray. It's like insane how many pieces of gray are out there. And so in this case, with main color, we have cello, right? So here's how we do it. We say @cello, and then we pop in our color. Whoop, not that one. Notice I'm doing lowercase just to be consistent. And then what we'll do is we'll reference our color that we just brought in, the name. So we'll say cello. See how that works? So what we do is we say, here's the base color. Like, this is like our big, if we're a painter, this is our palette. But then when we're actually painting, we utilize another variable. And here's why. Because if your big boss comes in, and this has happened quite a bit, or a designer, Anybody that has anything to do with color. So marketing team comes in, they need to make a change. Now, because you've built your site like this, you can come in here and they go, we want all of the headers to be a different color. And if you went in here and you put headers as to cello, you'd have to go and change all the cellos out, right? It's super frustrating. But if you made a thing called headers, then you could just replace that one variable, right? And so let's say headers were red. And then all your headers were in here and you said color, and then instead of main color, it was headers. Now I can swap it out and say, oh, actually Big Boss came in and he wants cello now, or she wants cello. See how awesome that is? So that's why you would want to use variables. Otherwise, you're right, it's kind of silly, it's just replacing. But in this case, this is really valuable. Okay, let's take a break. We've hit our cognitive load timer. So let's do a 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll keep diving into pre-processing. Okay. Time is up. Come on back to your computers. I always say that because I know some of you are using speakers and you're in the other room. I've been looking at your questions, and Zach, one of our project managers, has been answering them, and all of his answers are exactly what I would say. So thank you, Zach, for doing that. And if you see Zach reply, that is because he's been told to. So he's been helping out, and I'm not disregarding it. So every question I saw that Zach answered during the break, he's doing great. Everything he said is exactly right. Okay. And yes, Brock, interpolation is that word I described, to replacing something. Okay, let's get back to it. So at this point, we've learned how to use variables in the wild, like how programmers are using them effectively to have dry code. And so I'm not repeating myself over and over. I can just use cello. Now, you might be going, wait a second, you're repeating yourself twice here. I'm going, right. But down here in my code, obviously we have an H1 and a P tag. We're not doing a lot of stuff. But on, for example, PepsiCo, we had thousands of pages we had to build, right? And tons of colors. And even then, not tons of colors. Like we got this blue, this lighter blue, this darker gray, this off gray. Like you can see there's a lot of colors going on here. Now, images are still just images, right? They're not CSS. Like this isn't CSS, that's an image. But anything that's CSS is going to be those colors. All these colors down here, all this stuff is inside of a variable. Okay, so that is variables. And of course, there is more to variables. But again, for what you need to accomplish today in your project, that's all you need. You just need to know how to swap those variables. And you don't even need to do what I did, but I recommend you do. It's just a good practice to make sure your code is really under control. All right, let's move on. So the next concept we want to talk about is going to be mix-ins. So mix-ins are probably the best thing, I would say, about pre-processing. And if you thought pre-processing was awesome already, it's about to get a massive upgrade already. So let's say we've been using Flexbox, right? And we've been using it to center stuff. So inevitably, we have to write the following code. Like if we wanted to get our digital agency to be centered in both ways, like the H1, we'd have to go to our main content, right? And we'd say, okay, display, flex, and then of course we have our two items in here. So our H1 and our P tag. If we look at our HTML, so those things are going to be centered based on wherever they are. Now, if I had an H1 and I wanted it to be centered across the whole page, I could either do, flex wrap with 100%, but it doesn't matter. So in this case, let's say we wanted to space them evenly. Why not? So we could say justify content space evenly, right? And it'll space them evenly. And then we could say, and make sure it's centered no matter what, vertically. So we could say align items center. And heck, let's just do center, just so I can show you how cool this can be. So we have center, right? And let's say that we have other things that we want to center as our page grows. Well, guess what? This is super annoying to write that every time you want to center something, right? So we can abstract this out into its own class called a mixin. So mixins are also lazy loaded. So I'm going to put them at the top of the page. I'm going to comment this out and say mixin. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to type a class name, center. And I'm going to pop my code in here. And you're probably going, wait a second, what's he doing? Now I can actually put in some parentheses here that look like a function. And I can take center, and I can now pop it in here as a single class entity, hit a semicolon, and it centers all my content. Oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. Because now we can reuse all of our code. So this is why, my friends, we call it leaner style sheets, right? Because this is way leaner on us as developers. The code is still just as robust. But because what I mean by that is, let's watch what happens. When I view my compiled, I want you to pay attention to main content. So let's go to normal CSS. What's it doing? It's just injecting the 3 properties, right? So this is just like awesome, because now all I've got up here is my mixin that's centered, and then I've got all my content down here and center. Now notice something interesting. I put these parentheses here. I don't have to have those parentheses to have everything work. Notice everything still works. If you view compiled CSS and you don't put parentheses, it will keep it in as a class that you can reference, okay? So right here, we've got center, and it'll keep it. If you put the parentheses in it, it gets consumed like a variable and is gone. See how it's gone? Just like the variables. And again, they're lazy loaded, so it doesn't matter where you put them per se, but it does matter for the next developer to be able to read these things. Okay? Any questions? Stranger Things is awesome. Yes, we've gone from caveman to astronaut in 30 minutes. It's true. Hopefully you're seeing, because I saw a lot of you this morning going, like I said, doubting the pre-processing. And I'm like, oh man, they have no idea what I'm about to show them today. Okay, let's see. How is this different better than giving divs multiple classes? So Andrew, instead of giving multiple classes, because Andrew's saying, well, why can't we just do this? Why can't we just say center, right? And so the problem with that, Andrew, is that center would have to always be below the other style that you listed. So you'd have to make sure that your center was always at the very bottom of the page because of the cascade. But because of lazy loaded interpolation, I don't have to do that. I don't have to worry about where I put it. So that's why. Melanie says, so if they disappear, how does the next developer see them? Remember, Melanie, you are not, maybe you don't know this. This is a really good question, Melanie. I love that. You are no longer coding in CSS anymore, like ever. So I don't code in CSS when I'm doing projects freelance and stuff. Like, I'm doing less. I'm only working in this file. And then my CSS is being consumed by the browser, but I never edit this file again. I'm only using this forever till the next best thing comes out. So Melanie, the answer is your code here is what you develop and edit in. You don't touch the CSS file ever again. I've worked with teams that didn't understand that. I remember a team who's an offshores team in India, and they were great people. India is literally across the world directly from us. And so it's crazy because it's midnight for them. It's noon for us. It's the craziest time gap I think there is. And so during the day, I'd be working. I'd send a pull request out to them. And then the night, I'd come back. And then the next morning, all my styles were gone. I'd recompile my compiler. And it's like, what did you guys even do? And then the next day, and finally we got on a phone call like at 3 a.m. And they were so mad at me. They're like, you keep deleting our styles. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then I found out they didn't understand that preprocessors completely destroy the CSS file every time. They rebuild the CSS every time. And so then they went, oh my gosh. And we had a good epiphany for them. But I think that's a wise lesson for all of us, that when you compile your less, like when I hit this view compiled, it is deleting and replacing every time. So on your machine, when you run that less watcher compiler command, that thing is deleting the CSS every time and putting in a new one. So how does that work on a server? Well, you just usually upload your less to the server and you run a command on your server and it deletes the CSS that way and replaces it. So hopefully that helps, Melanie. Patrick says, when we add more than one class to a tag, does that new class make it too deep or is it still one deep? Interestingly enough, great question, Patrick. So Patrick's saying, hey, if we did this, another class, right? Another class. Does that make it deeper? The answer is no, they're sibling selectors. So it just depends on who's deeper in the page. So if main content is lower, so in this example, this is really good question. So main content, if this is lower in the page, it will supersede another class. So for example, if another class was right here, main content would be more specific. However, because they're siblings, whoever's lower on the page, this one will be more specific than that one. So with multiple classes, you have to be very careful because you want whatever class you want to have the most specificity lower on the page. And that's exactly right. Patrick says, which is why we should nest them to avoid that. And that's true, but remember, don't go more than 4 deep. Okay. Let's see. Yep. Everybody's excited about less. Awesome. We're not in Kansas anymore. It's so true. Michael says, is the less file name the same as your CSS with less as the extension? So great question. The answer is .less, .less is the name of your file. And then it outputs to the file of your choosing. We'll talk about that after our second break. We'll talk about like how the project looks. Okay. So at this point, you're probably getting super excited about mix-ins. I haven't even, this is just level 1 of 4 of the level of awesomeness of a mix-in. So we're going to talk about levels 2, 3, and 4 tomorrow. But today I just want you to kind of consume the idea here of what we can do. Spoiler alert for tomorrow, just to get excited, you can pass in parameters. So we can actually pass in parameters into our mix-ins like functions. But that's tomorrow. Get excited. All right. So with mix-ins, we can actually mix in multiple classes. So this is level 2. So we'll say mix-in level 1 is just one thing. Mix-in level 2. And these are not real terms. I'm making these up for us, right? There's no such thing as a mix-in level 2. But you can actually mix in multiple classes. So I'm going to call this like a level 2 just for fun. And what I can do is, let's say we have a class that's got, or a mix-in or anything. It could be any class, by the way. But let's just make another one and we'll call it like general font style or something. And our general font style would be like font size. We'll do 6 rem because we're just crazy like that. So then we can actually mix these two together. So I could say, I want to center it and I want to have a general font style in the same mix-in. So then I can go in here to my level 2 mix-in. And again, if I don't want it to compile, I can put these parentheses. Also, these parentheses help the next developer know that you're using a mix-in because the syntax looks so weird, right? So it's nice for the next developer to go, oh yeah, that's clearly a mix-in. So I come over here and now watch what happens if I replace center with my new level 2. Now we get our rem font size. Let's make this crazy. Let's see, 7. Oh, you know what? It's getting overwritten because I was more specific. So that's a specificity good thing, is that I was so specific here it didn't get overwritten. So let me just comment these out so you can see it real quick. So there we go. Now we've got a mix-in that took in a font size and a center, and then I mixed them together to create a new mix-in with the best of both worlds. This is a very silly example, right? Because it's 6 rem. But a more realistic example would be like, okay, I've got display flex, justify content center, justify line item center. And maybe I've got a display flex component that's like aligning items a certain way, right? So then I could pass this in and I could say justify, or I could even say evenly or something. And then I could say, we're going to justify content space evenly. And I know that I almost always do flex wrap. Like, you see how that works? So it's like you find things that you're using quite a bit. You find repeatable code, and then that's a great opportunity to put it in a mix-in. And then you could mix and match them and say, all right, well, maybe I want to space content evenly in flex wrap, and I only want to line item center, but I don't want justify content center. Well, the cool thing is if you do center evenly, so we could change this to center and then evenly, and it'll do all the things. So really, your imagination is the limit here. It's just, what thing are you repeating, and can you mix it together? And the answer is yes, you can. Sometimes all this power is overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, when do I mix and when do I not mix? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. You mix when you're using it more than 3 times, or you know you're going to use it more in the future, and for now it's only 1 time. So it's like a future use. When I think of mix-ins, I think, am I going to use this in the future? Variables, I'll use them every time. So if there's a font stack or a color, I haven't talked about font stack. Let me talk about that in a second here, but I see some questions. Patrick says, not so much about less, but the industry. How often do front-end developers come back to their code? Say someone like a Facebook is always changing and updating things, but someone like Google, his full stack devs won't be in the front, right? Let's have a hard time imagining someone who enjoys the front end always being used to put to work once a website is deployed. You're coming back to your code quite a bit if you're working on a product. So remember on our AMA on Friday, I showed you Best Company. Remember that? I would come back to this front end every day of the week, and we would make adjustments. So that I mean, it's every day. Come back to this, and you tweak, and you make a move, and your marketing team says, okay, let's try this. We're going to do this new thing. And then, like when I was working at Rain, they gave me a new project every 2 to 3 weeks. So I never came back to the same code twice. So it just depends on where you work, Patrick. There is no like golden hard fast rule. Travis says, do you use mix-ins to replace a lot of classes with HTML? Looks like you have the answer. Okay, sweet. But yes, I'll use mix-ins to replace repeatable classes. Jai says, is there a command to remove a certain line from a mix-in when calling it? No. Ultimately, you just use the cascade. So what I mean by that is, justify content, for example, you're saying, what if we didn't want that because this one did it? Well, you would just put it lower and then it would override it, right? It's just simple cascade. So let's say I wanted to display flex, justify content, align items, and I just wanted to throw on flex wrap and maybe another property here. I would just make sure that evenly was below center right here. And then that means justify content would overwrite this one. It's just cascade. So that's how you do it. Just use the cascade. Make sure it's lower on the page. And that's how you overwrite commands. Okay. Oh, Jai says, by the way, am I saying Jai? I'm saying Jai like J-A-I. Is that correct? I feel awful if I'm butchering your name. So Jai says, sorry, I mean if you want to use a certain mixin, but only want to exclude a certain line in that mixin. No, can't do that. You'd have to write a new mixin. Okay, So at this point, we're looking really good on time. Let's talk about the next thing. So we've talked about center evenly. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. Just kind of silly examples. Well, I'll keep font size, and we'll make it 6 rems is fine. We'll bring it in here, just so we can see that the level 2 mix-in did indeed work. But just because it works doesn't mean we should use it, right? So we'll get rid of it. And we'll just use center, because that's all that was really helping us. And I'll bring back in our fonts. All right, I'm going to save this so we're all caught up together. Okay, it's kind of like sigh, but a light. Sigh, sigh. Got it. Okay. Thank you for saying that, Zai. In this case, we've got home, we've got our general styles, and then we've got our mix-ins and our variables. So we've covered a lot of ground already. And one of the last big ticket items is nested media queries. Okay? So nested media queries. These are called @nested rules. So this is really interesting, and probably one of the most helpful things for responsive design. But I can tell you now, before I show it to you, it's the most polarizing thing I'll show you today. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm in the camp that loves it. So here's what's going to happen. Normally, yesterday and Monday, we've been doing this, @media, and we've been doing desktop first. So we've been saying max width, and we'll say like 500 px. And then we'd have to rewrite the style. So we'd have to say like main content, H1, color red. And so then if we get to 500 px or below, let's see, did I get that right? Nope, I didn't. I wasn't as specific. Home, main content. There we go. So there's my red, right? And this is great. But now if I want to get the P tag, I come down here and I say P. Turn that red as well. Scroll down here, there's the red. Okay, so that was yesterday. Today, I'm going to show you something interesting called nested @rule. And so what it does is it states that you can actually nest inside of your selector a media query. So I can actually take this media query directly, nest it inside of my H1 tag, okay? And then I can put my color here too, so color red. Notice that I'm just typing the property. This is why I was goofing so hard on Monday and Tuesday, because I'm so used to this. So you don't have to write the selector again because you're in the selector. So let me kill this media query. Let's see if it works. Aha, works perfectly. Not cool? So now I've got this media query nested for this one element. Now, here's the polarizing part. Yes, you have to write a media query per element. It's the opposite problem. So in the media query at the bottom of the page, you had to rewrite the element with all the selector chain. Equally annoying. You come down here, and now you've got to write the selector all over again. So if we come to our P tag, you can see we've got blue, and now we've got red. But to me, this is better because you now know, no matter what, for the rest of your time developing this app or website, you know exactly what this H1 is going to look like on all devices. Like you always know what this H1 is going to perform. Versus the other way where you had the media query at the bottom of the page, you had to scroll or have to have 2 CSS pages open with your tablet down here and your desktop up here, and you had to like go and read every which one and scroll and scroll. There's tons of human error in that process. In this process, the human error is very minimized. So what we can do is, what I mean by human error is like, let's put in tablet as well. It's a matter of copying and pasting, put 800, and now you know on desktop, my color is equal to headers. On tablet, my color is going to be blue or teal, and then on phone, it's going to be red. Like now I know everything that's ever going to happen to this element forever inside of my ecosystem. Like this is powerful because I'm not going to make an error trying to figure out, well, what was it on desktop and what was it on tablet and what was it on phone? No, it's all there. So if I scroll out, you can see the default is the blue. Get down to tablet, it goes teal. Get down to phone, and it goes red. So for me, and for almost all developers I work with, this is 10 times better. Because now, let's say I'm working on some code with some people, and someone's assigned to go work on the H1 tag. They make some changes here. They can just go, hey, Josh, go look at the H1 tag on the homepage and just verify what I did there. And I can go look at the H1 tag on the homepage, and I can see everything they've done. And I don't have to like think about what they did. I don't have to scroll down to the bottom of this page endlessly. Now, what does it look like when it compiles, though? It looks pretty hairy. So if we view the compiled code, we come down here, it's got a media query that wraps around each piece with a new selector on it. So max width 800, H1, color teal, 500, H1, color red. And you could make an argument here that says, hey, doesn't this hurt the browser load speed? Does this not hurt your CSS? And I say unto you, it is so minuscule, it does not. And you have to use the same selectors in your media query anyway, so you're writing this anyway. The thing that hurts the browser's load time and renderings is the amount of selectors. So this thing right here doesn't hurt. This can hurt sometimes. But you still have to write these selectors anyway, so it's actually sixes. It's the same problem. You have to write those selectors for both media queries anyway at the bottom of the page. So because you're only living in your less file, this makes a lot of sense. If you were living in your CSS file, it's a pretty big headache, right? Okay. So that is called nested at media rules. Let's see any questions we have. So Zeiss says, can you achieve the same if we put the media query below and outside of H1 and put the P within main content? No. It just bubbles to its direct relative. So this media query is actually going to bubble up and wrap around whatever it's nested in. So it's each individual element. Okay, why would you nest it instead of just making a big media query for each screen size? Is it personal preference or is there an advantage? So I think I've said this a couple times. Let me say it super clear because it's a valid question. It's a really valid question. The answer is this. Not having to scroll up and down on a page over and over or have two CSS style sheets open is such a huge time sink for a developer. Like that's the big difference here. That's it. Is not having to have two pages open, scrolling up and down, trying to match styles. Like that's really the only advantage this gives. Outside of that, they're the same problem. We're fixing the same problem with media queries. So that's it. It's a convenience thing. But my gosh, is this convenient when you have 4,000 lines of less? So please consider how convenient this is. In this scenario, with there's two simple kind of dumb things we're doing here, yeah, you're right. Like it makes a little bit more sense to have a media query at the bottom of the page, sure. But when you get into literally hundreds and hundreds and thousands of lines of this, yeah, right. The bottom of the page is as big as a book. You're just scrolling for days trying to find the media query with your Control F, and it's awful. But when you know everything's right here, oh, life is so much better. So in this tiny little example, I can see your skepticism and I acknowledge it. But I'm telling you from experience that in the future, this will save your bacon because you won't have to go jump around and have human error all day. Alejandro says, can you store the media query styling in a mixin? You kind of can, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll talk about that. Okay. So at this point, I want you guys to kind of play around with some CSS, or some less, I mean. I've got a dashboard project for you. Where is it? It is under pre-processing. Where are you? There you are. Let's see. That's all for tomorrow. Nesting. Here it is. So I've got a little challenge I want to throw at you. It's not, seriously, it's not like a code challenge this morning. And by the way, I want to mention, I saw some of you lamenting the code challenge this morning. Those code challenges are purely to get your brain operational and sometimes even shut down, right? Just to get you thinking and prepare you for JavaScript, which is happening next week. The JavaScript I'm teaching you next week is not the same kind of stuff you're doing in your code challenges, as far as like the challenge that like the regular expression you experience today. Like we won't even talk about regex next week. Those challenges are meant for you to get your brains going. So if you see those challenges and they're kicking your butt, good. Find out what's kicking your butt, but don't lose sleep over it. Don't stress. Monday, we're going to be talking about variables and functions and objects and arrays. And it's going to be just like we're doing here, nice and slow and, you know, in a good pace. So don't stress. I wanted to make a note for you so not freak out about JavaScript, because it's really fun. All right, so what I'm going to have you do is you're not allowed to touch the HTML. You got to read the rules. So in this case, I've got these 3 boxes. It says I should be red, I should be purple, and I should be black. So don't touch the HTML, because otherwise you could just put your own class and be done, right? I'll give you the link when I'm done, Marshall. Calm down. So in this case, I love your excitement, though. So here's the rules of the game. You cannot change the values of the variables. So these variables, no touchy. You cannot change the HTML, no touchy. No adding additional color properties. So you can't like just override the color. So match the colors with the titles in the boxes. So yes, this is a nesting problem. So make sure that you study the code and rearrange the selectors and variables. So basically you're going to be moving your code around here. That's it, okay? So I want you to study the code and move it around, but no touching the HTML and no changing the values here. But you can copy, you can move stuff around here, okay? Like you can delete values and replace values, but just no touching these variables and no touching HTML. Okay, now I'll give you the link. It is a nesting problem. I'm going to give you 7 minutes to complete it. Some of you will get it done super quick. If you do, just take a break. Ready, go. All right, time is up. So let's take a look at how we can solve this. If we go look at the code, say I should be read. Now, one of the first things I always do is I look at the HTML and I go, okay, what do I got? What am I working with here? I like to minimize all my content and just look at the bare minimum. I've got a container, I've got a box, and I've got multiple classes. Remember, multiple classes, sibling selectors. So the lower they are on the page, the more powerful they are in the specificity spectrum. So box, box one, box two. Okay, I can see what's going on here. Open it up. I got an H1, and they're all the same. All right, so at least I know what my HTML is doing now. Then I come over to my CSS, study the variables a little bit. Okay, red, black, purple, variables. Got it, makes sense. Okay, it looks like I've got some HTML stuff going on here. Container, looks good. And now I've got this box. Now notice if I minimize everything, things get a little pretty clear pretty quick. So it's not matching the same layout that I've got going on here. So I've got to look around and find out, okay, there's box one, then there's box two. So I can see that there's something amiss already based on my HTML structure. So number one, I got to figure out where should my boxes be nested? They should be nested inside of my container. So that means anything outside of container, which ends right there, is not going to look good. So I'm going to go ahead and fork this. I'm going to call this CS or 4 CS13 just in case you didn't get it done and you want to reference. So we'll come down here. And the first thing I notice is box 3 is way outside. So remember, single line comment allows me to say this is container. And now I'm realizing, aha, box 3 is way out of line here. So I'm going to bring it back in line and put it under box 1. So there we go. I should be black. I now have a win right there. It's working. So that's done. Now box 1 says purple box. It says I should be red. Well, that seems simple enough. I just need to change this variable value to red box. And there we go. Now I've got my red box. And now I'm looking around for my box 2 class, and lo and behold, it is nested inside of box, which is its sibling. So that's not possible. So I've got to bring it back out here and make sure I put it in the right order. And now I've also got to change this to be purple. And there you have it, the solution. So let me give you the solution. Okay. Michael says Les is very relaxed on closing the brackets. If I exclude all closing brackets after the last box, it still compiles correctly. It shouldn't compile correctly. You're probably getting errors and just don't realize it. You probably have a little exclamation point down here you're not seeing. So the problem with Les, not the problem with us when we start learning less is we don't know those things. And so your compiler will stop working and it'll just be stuck. So if I were to delete these ending brackets, you'll see that I get an error. And then the error says possibly something missing. So you actually cannot have any open brackets at all. So that's a little tip right there. I think I had that same problem when I started. I was like, aha, when I had a missing thing, Les just stopped working. And so that is a gotcha. But we're going to talk about our compiler for the last 20 minutes here. And we'll talk about how that impacts us. So yeah, now you can see it. Yep. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break because I don't assume challenges are breaks. I know that there are challenges. So let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we will then talk about how to set up your project today and send you on your way to lunch. If you're feeling confident in your project abilities, still stick around because I want to talk about the project. So 5-minute break. All right, come on back for the last 15 minutes here. We're going to look at the project and the expectations of you this afternoon in combination with all this information that I've given you. So we're going to be building a digital resume today. Great Idea webpage has been awesome. It's been a good vehicle for learning, but I want to push you guys into a creative direction today. So I'm going to have you build your own digital resume or a fictitious one if you don't want to put your own information. Some people are very private. Some people don't want to put it up there. I think that's fine. Patrick, I was loathing doing the great website again, and I don't blame you. But I can't think of anything. Nope. There's no more Great Idea website until we might bring it back for DOM manipulation, but that's about it. But it's not anything to do with styling. So it's not completely dead, not yet. But in this case, we have Johnny Appleseed Web Dev. So this is just a silly mock-up I made for Johnny Appleseed potentially building his own website. So in this case, you'll notice I've got some navigation items. They don't work. This is just the home page of Johnny Appleseed. So you're only building one page today. Only one page is the expectation. Of course, you could stretch and build the portfolio, but this is going to be from scratch. So you will be the HTML and CSS builder and content. You're building everything today. So I'm basically taking off the training wheels and giving you the keys to a full experience using pre-processing as a tool to help you speed up your development. So a single page. There are some requirements though, of course. So we go down to the project. It's not converted CSS. It's a digital resume. I got to update that, but doesn't matter. So in this case, let me give you this link. This is what we're going to be doing this afternoon. So task 1, set up your project with Git. You know the drill. Task 2, set up your preprocessor. So I've given you explicit instructions like line by line video. If you're not a video audio person and you like to read, I've given you all of the reading instructions step by step. Everything is in Training Kit. So basically, if you go to preprocessing 1, scroll up here, go past the syntax of what we talked about today, and go to here. Now, it does matter what operating system you're on. If you're on a Mac, you've got to follow the Mac instructions. Okay? They're totally different than the PC and Linux instructions. You use Homebrew, and the reason we want to use Homebrew is because of a permissions issue loophole with NPM. If you've already done NPM and you already use NPM, I would even recommend you skip this stuff. But Homebrew is amazing. It's a package manager for Mac operating systems. PC does have the same thing. It's called Chocolate, but I just don't like it. It's not very good, chocolatey or whatever. So in this case, we're just going to use the good old-fashioned Microsoft installer, the MSI installer file. So go watch the videos. I'm not going to walk through that here with you because it's too much detail and it wouldn't help both parties. So that's why I made a pre-recorded video for you. So you PC installers, go do that. You Mac installers, go follow these instructions. For you Linux users, they have the distribution of whatever kernel you're using. So you can use Arch Linux, CentOS, Debian, whatever you want. And it'll have the same instructions for you, and you should be good to go. So all bases are covered as far as the compiler goes. Then, as you go through this, what you should, by the time you're done with all this stuff, you should have Node installed, Git Bash if you're on PC, Yarn, and Git Bash should be installed already if you have, if you follow the instructions from the intro to Git. But this is in here just in case you didn't have it. Yarn, less watch compiler. Okay, so all these things are going to be covered in this video, including getting your project up and running. It's all there for both Mac and PC. So make sure you do this first. I'm not going to review this with you because it's already here in a video and it's already here in a step-by-step. But what I will do is show you how the project should look when you get it up and running. So here's your digital resume. This is an example of what you could build. So if your creative juices are just out of commission right now, you're more of a back-end developer, you're not really into the design side of things, guys, just copy my layout and just put in your content. I have no problem with that. So if your creative juices are not working today, just copy this layout. If you want to push yourself and have tons of fun with this and build your own thing from scratch, that is the preferred way. I would love if you could come up with your own resume based on the requirements I give you. Okay? But again, it's not required to do that. So if we go down to the project, go to the Git thing that I sent you, the repo. So you set up your preprocessor. The way you know if it's running is you'll run this command. So let me, I'll get up my terminal real quick and I'll share it. So here's my terminal. And if I run the command less c, which is the node module that we installed for less, the official one, by the way, we'll say -v. And it'll give me the version that I have, which is 3.0.1. Okay, so this is what you should see, at least something like this. You might have a different version I haven't reinstalled lately. But you should see a message here saying you've got it installed if you did it right. So that's what I'm going to have you do in your project. Then you're going to open up your terminal and navigate. Now, terminal is just the word I'm using because it really is a terminal for PC and Mac. It is an appropriate term. But Mac actually calls it terminal and Windows calls it the command prompt, right? So in this case, and then in Linux it's the command line. So we go CD, and CD is our bash command to change directory, right? Now remember, in Mac land, I can just drag and drop. So I'm going to do that just for speed here. I'm going to drag and drop my path in here. So I have my users, JNow, documents, get, preprocessing 1. So this should be the same kind of similar path. Like, of course, mine's going to be different up to here. So whatever you have here is up to you. This is just my computer. But you're going to come in here and see preprocessing 1. I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm inside of my preprocessing folder. This is what you will see from your GitHub repo. Now, the next line of command that you need to run is less-watch-compiler. So this thing right here, this less-watch compiler command, will allow your computer to listen to every time you hit the save button, every time you hit Control-S or Command-S or however you save your files. The second you save your less file, it will compile out to the less. Okay? In CodePen, it's instantaneous. So as soon as we wrote something, it just magically appeared, right? Well, we don't live in CodePen. We live on our local machines when we're building. And so when we're building, if you don't hit save, the compiler won't run. Does that make sense? I want to make sure we have a good understanding of that. This compiler is a godsend because otherwise you would have to type less C every time you wrote your file. And it's just awful. So if you have this compiler watching, it'll change every time you hit save. Okay. So in this case, we've got our compiler. The next command that you have to write, this is all one big command. It's all in your repo. You're going to type less because Let's Watch Compiler looks for the folder to compile. So it looks for the less folder. And we'll come back to the folder structure in a second, but you can see it right there, right, in our terminal, right here where it says less. So I'm saying, okay, look at the less folder, and then I want you to compile or output into your CSS folder. So look at the less folder for your files, and look for the CSS folder to where you want to go. That's what this command is doing. So it's saying, watch these two folders. Then this extra little command, it says index.less. If we didn't write this command, it would try to compile every file with a .less into a .css file. And tomorrow we're going to introduce multiple files, so that'll make more sense. But today you just need to understand this last little command, get used to using it because it's the best practice. We only want one CSS to be outputted. Again, tomorrow we'll deep dive on this conversation. So I'm going to hit enter. And it says watching directory for file changes. That means I did the right thing. So I'm going to, on my local machine, make a change I'm not going to waste time jumping between screens. So just watch what happens as I change my file. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make an HTML tag, which is part of the instruction. And I'm going to make the background color red. Background dash red, or background color dash is equal to red. And I'm going to hit save. Ready, set, save. Now you can see the terminal kicked in and said the file on my index.ls was changed. Recompiling at, and then that's what's going on. Okay, now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and open up my file and change my screen so we can see what happened. And you should see a blindingly red web page. I can see some of your faces change red because it's so bright. So this shows that my compiler is working. I want you to do the same process with me. And so I've actually got this, everything I just did step by step here. So I want you to verify your compiler is working by changing the background to red. This will show me that you've done the right thing. Once you see the red screen, you can delete it and you're ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my HTML colored now that I've got it. I'm going to recompile. You have to refresh your page every time, okay, to see your styles change. It's not CodePen. Remember, CodePen did everything automatically for us. We no longer live in that automatic world. We have to refresh and save quite a bit now. Carlos says, if you close the terminal, will it stop watching? Yes, it will. So don't close your terminal. You have to have it open at all times. Also, if you make a mistake, your terminal will yell at you. So let me show you that really quick. Come back to my terminal. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change something, like I'll break a line of code and mess up some code and try to save it. So now as soon as I save, it says parse error, unrecognized input, possibly missing something in, and it tries to tell you where the line broke. And then what I did is I removed a semicolon and a closing brace. So it'll actually stop working. The problem is, if you're just looking at your index.html file, like if you're just looking at the browser and you don't look at your terminal, you're going to have the same kind of problem that like Michael talked about before, where it seems like it's working, but it doesn't recognize it anymore. So this is very, very important that you look at your compiler 24/7. So I just made my changes and I got rid of my thing and now we're ready to go. Everything's running again just fine. Okay, so those are the nuances. And that's it though. That's the craziest stuff with what you're going to be doing today with your compiler. So let me come back to the browser. Let's see this piece right here. So it starts off blank, you guys. You have a blank canvas. I highly recommend that you look at this for inspiration, but you can do whatever the heck you want as long as you follow these objectives. So down here, review the example and note you're only required to build one page. Anything more than that would be stretch. Inevitably, someone says, am I supposed to build a full portfolio website in an afternoon? That's impossible. And I'm going, right. I only want you to do the homepage, and it's just your resume. It's not a portfolio, it's a resume. So the resume content will be provided by you. I think this is easy because most of you should at least have an idea of what your resume looks like. You should be able to copy and paste or at least make something up. The content can be about you or a fictional character. So again, if you don't feel comfortable. Content. So everything that says content is stuff you got to come up with HTML-wise. Navigation. Build a simple navigation with 4 items of your choosing. I don't care what it is, it's got to be 4 items. Content. Intro. Have a short intro as to why you would be a good hire. So this is like unusually at every resume, there's some little intro. Content. Skills. Showcase a list of skills you have somewhere on your resume. So put them on your resume and list out the skills that would make you a good hire. Content. Work history. Showcase your work history somewhere on your resume. So if you look at the digital resume I provided to you, there's my little tiny intro. Like I told you, it's tiny. This is even tinier. Technology is my jam. Then you come over here, put in some fake stuff. So this actually might be a better example of an intro. Here's stuff I'm good at. Like here's my skills, right? and then here's work history. I just used a table. All right. I mean, that's all I'm asking you for. And of course, contact, provide some way that someone can get a hold of you. So phone number, email, or if you have time and you feel good about it, do a contact form, but it doesn't have to work, just HTML. So that is the content portion of what you need to give me as digital resume content to be complete for this project. On the CSS side, on the left side, you need to use variables. So incorporate variables in your project for color and font stack. So just to recap really quick on the font stack stuff, you just have to be able to put in a font. So put a variable and assign it to be some font. I highly recommend, and even one of my stretch goals is to use Google Fonts. But again, make sure you get this stuff done before you go mess around with Google Fonts. Unless you feel really comfortable, then bring them in. And then you could put Google Fonts inside of a variable, and it's really fun. Nesting. Every selector should be nested inside the main container. Avoid having global styles. So the same kind of thing I talked about with the home and services. I want to see that kind of architecture from you. Mix-ins. Create 2 mix-ins of your choosing. Hint, it's super helpful to use Flexbox properties. So I just want you to come up with your own 2 mix-ins and use them. And then mobile. I want you to use nested at rules to provide a mobile version of your resume. Use 500px at max width for mobile. So it doesn't have to be crazy, guys. Like, it's up to you. You don't have to make it super hard. Like, be simplistic. Focus on getting your project up and using pre-processing. Pre-processing is going to make this so much easier than just normal CSS. You should notice an instant, like, wow, this is so much funner to write inside of nested elements. An example of this thing working, of like a resume being coded out, looks like this. Let's see. Maybe, I don't know if I have it actually. Nope. Where is it? Here it is. Oh, maybe I don't have it on here. I was just looking at it. Oh, well. So, but the idea is that you could take this and you could smush it down to a mobile version of your liking. Like, there's no design file. It's super open creative. But in this case, I would just stack everything, right? So I just stack this stuff on top of each other so it's not squished 50%. It'd be awful to look at. Okay? That is your project this afternoon, and those are the expectations. Any questions? Jonathan says, the instructions say, nest every selector inside the main container, but we talked about not going more than 4 deep. Should we just do something like container next class? Yes, that's exactly right, Jonathan. Avoid going 4 deep by introducing a new class. No, nope. Carlos says, sorry, I've been talking for 2 hours, I think. Carlos says, so no tablet version necessary? Oh my gosh. That's right. Only desktop and mobile. So tablet could be a stretch if you want it. Just mobile and desktop. Because you're building this from scratch. No HTML provided. Let me show you what your code looks like. It starts like this. Empty, right? My resume. So there's no viewport tag. There's nothing. Like, you've got to figure this stuff out. Now, if you look at the less folder, you'll notice you've got an index.less file in it. This is where you're going to live. So sometimes I'll put in a little comment here that says, is this working or something, so I can see it. In this case, I've given you basically a big reset, including a box sizing border box universal. And then you could just start writing your code on line 59, just so you have it from scratch. Do not, I repeat, do not go into your CSS file and code here. This is where your file will be compiled using that lesswatch compiler command. So don't be that team across the ocean that deleted my CSS every day, right? So less file only. And the beauty is it's all hooked up. It's all wired in. So if you look at your index.html, you have a link to your index.css. So basically, if I were to graph this out with you or take my annotation tool, you compile this with your terminal. It outputs a file to your CSS folder. Your CSS folder is then read by your index.html, and then you see the page. Okay? It's that simple. So it's a little bit different than CodePen. CodePen was very automatic, but it's great for learning. Could we use Bacon and Ibsen for content? Yes, I'm not worried about content. I mean, if you want, I would recommend you take this seriously and use it as a resume piece in the future. But if that's not your style, don't worry about it. Just Bacon and Ibsen everything. Let's see. How do you make a table? Google it, Clint. You'll find out. It's real quick. Just type HTML table. Okay. You don't have to do a table, by the way. You can just do divs or list items or whatever you want. Okay. Everybody's prepared? One of the stretch items, by the way, is to go back to your old great idea stuff from yesterday and convert it into nested CSS with variables, mixins, and the whole shebang. And then if you want, you can create a whole portfolio page. If you're just flying through this stuff, go make an actual portfolio page with projects and just push yourself. Link back to your GitHub repo. And make this thing really awesome. So these stretch goals are pretty big. The Google font's not so big, but this one's pretty big, and this one's even bigger. Linda says, so we don't touch the index CSS, only index.less. That's exactly right, Linda. Perfect. Marius, great idea, is going to be your favorite website for the rest of your life. Okay, everybody, you are prepared. So get to it. Well, actually, go take a break. Go to lunch. And then come back to it. All right, my friends, I'll see you tomorrow, and we will be doing advanced pre-processing. We're going to up our game even further tomorrow. It's going to be great. So I'm excited to reveal even more secrets to you. But focus on today, get your project done, and enjoy your afternoon. See you later.